If just 10 years ago you brought your 11-year-old daughter to the doctor and told the physician, she says she's a boy, and if the doctor got back to you and said, well, in response to her claim, we're going to remove her breasts and stop her puberty, you would know you're not dealing with a doctor at all, but a witch doctor, and you would probably call the authorities. Wasn't that long ago? Well, now the authorities themselves are saying exactly the same thing. Here is someone you may recognize, the Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, telling you that blocking a child's puberty, the most natural of all progressions in life, isn't bad, isn't grotesque, isn't an attack on nature, isn't life-threatening. No, it's instead life-saving. Watch.
Gender-affirming care is life-saving, medically necessary, age-appropriate, and a critical tool for healthcare providers. As a pediatrician, when it comes to making sure kids are healthy and happy, I know how important care that affirms someone's true identity can be.
Yeah. Notice that's our top doctor standing in front of a DNC backdrop, if you'd like to know how politicized medicine has become, thoroughly, totally, completely, and gravely. But no matter how much they tell you that it's totally normal to change your sex, even though it's biologically impossible, most people don't buy it, and most people are outraged, horrified by the idea that kids, prepubescent kids, are getting these so-called treatments. But they are. Doctors and hospitals deny it, but we know for a fact it's happening thanks to one brave physician called Eithan Haim. He works at Texas Children's Hospital, or did. And while he was there, he found that that hospital was secretly performing sex change procedures on children while, again, denying it to the public. So he went public and told the rest of the country what was happening. And he found himself immediately targeted for prosecution by the state of Texas. And he is not bowing in any way. Dr. Haim joins us right now. Doctor, thank you so much for coming on. So there are two parts of the story that I think are shocking and worth hearing about in detail. The first is what you found, and the second is what happened to you personally after. Can you start with the first? What did you discover working there?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on.
Of course.
But when I was working at Texas Children's Hospital, I was a surgical resident, which means I was in my training phase to become a board-certified surgeon. And while I was working there, the hospital had released a statement in March of 2022 that said they were unequivocally shutting down their transgender program because of the legal risks. And I quickly found out this was a complete lie, completely untrue. Just 3 days after that, they had placed a puberty-blocking device into an 11-year-old girl. And I knew this because I worked at the hospital. I knew the people who were doing these procedures. They had told me about it. And I saw the frequency of these procedures increasing over the next couple of months. And then you see the directors of a program that supposedly does not exist given the opportunity to speak at the hospital's most prestigious lecture series. So they would teach these general pediatricians how to ask these children about their gender identity behind the backs of their parents. They would perpetuate the lie that either these kids have to adopt a false identity, become chronic medical patients, or they're going to kill themselves. And when I understood the extent of the deception that was happening, that Texas Children's Hospital told the public they were shutting down this program in March of 2022, but behind closed doors, they did the exact opposite. They increased the scope of its practice and prioritized it to the highest levels. I knew I had a responsibility to do something about that. I had a responsibility as a surgeon, as an individual. So I had to make it known to the public. And that's when I had reached out to Christopher Rufo, who broke the story on May 16th, 2023.
So first of all, bless you for doing that. But there are many levels on which this is distressing, logically, morally, but let's just address medically. As far as I understand, we don't know the long-term effects of arresting a child's natural development, say giving an 11-year-old so-called puberty blockers. Do we know what that means when that child is 55?
We don't know all the effects because so much of it has never even been done before. But
Yes.
it's important to know, what it really means to block these kids' puberty, right? Where they don't have any hormonal issues to begin with. They don't have any measurable hormonal diseases that are being treated. This is a psychological problem that they have.
Yes.
So they're taking healthy children and putting them into a disease state when they're giving them these puberty blockers. And, I see these procedures as just as radical as all these others like mastectomies and vaginoplasties.
Yes.
And it's a subtle point because when you give these medications, the effect is on every single system in your body because it has to do with your physiology. Because every system relies on these hormones to function, right, to develop. And especially during the time of puberty, that's when it's most important. So it's not just, when you get a mastectomy, it's your breasts that are removed. But with these puberty blockers, it's your heart, your bones that are affected, your sexual development, right, your psychological development.
Yes.
And what this translates into is permanent physical changes and permanent psychological changes. And what that looks like is having 18, 19, 20-year-old young adult men with the sexual anatomy of a 11-year-old, or a young woman who may not be able to have children. And all these people who have these problems that affect a bunch of different organ systems. And, it was during a time when they at least had the capacity to understand the consequences for their actions.
It's grotesque. And now that you explain it like that, clinically, straightforwardly, it's hard to believe that anyone would do that to a child, much less a doctor. You don't need to use their names, but I'm interested. Was this a small group of marginalized crackpots on the medical staff at the hospital, or who were these people? Where in the ecosystem of the hospital?
When I first heard about these procedures being done, I thought it must just be one rogue physician.
Right, exactly.
Because the hospital had said they were shutting down the program because of the legal risks. Unequivocally, that's what they said. So it was unfathomable that they would just continue it behind closed doors and, build it into a multidisciplinary clinic. Psychology, social work, psychiatry, endocrinology, right? All these different specialties.
Yes.
So, no, it was not just one physician. This was a priority for the hospital where they not only included multiple specialties, but also were advertising it and advertising like their algorithmic approach to these primary care pediatricians.
Can you? I've always wondered, and no one's ever really explained it to me adequately. But since you work there, I'll ask you: what do you think the motive was? Why would anyone want to do this to a child? Do you think?
I think it's different for different people. I think there's some people who know that it's inherently wrong, and it's easy to sway those people with possible financial benefits because it can be something that's very lucrative because you have all these specialties, you're seeing all these patients. But then I think the more important component is an ideology where people have bought into this idea that they can play God, that they can create this new type of human. And for them, it provides a meaning because, there's something missing in their life and they have to fill it with something. They have to believe in something. Because for me, I just don't think that a person could do that to a child without really, really believing in it.
Yes.
And that's the most awful thing because, these kids are going to grow up and one day they're going to look back and say, the people who were supposed to love me and protect me were the ones who had put me in the most risk, which is, unforgivable.
That's, I think you're exactly right. I wouldn't know, but I'm guessing that's exactly the correct explanation. These are people who really believe in what they're doing. You wouldn't do it otherwise. But if you could just expand on a phrase you just used, they feel like they're creating a new kind of human. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's not possible for a boy to transition into a girl or a girl to transition into a boy. It's just not. And I think that they're trying to create this new person who can, where they can be the ones to solve the problem, where these doctors can be the ones to be the hero. And it's the illusion of short-term efficacy when you take these confused adolescent children and they're looking for answers, and they're looking for the adults in their life to guide them to how to live their life in a meaningful way. And I think it's these people want to be those doctors that provide them that, what they always say, life-saving treatment, but it's just not true. It's something that, they can't even rationally explain it. There's no medical basis behind it. They're using physiological therapies for a psychological problem.
Yes.
It's the same reason we don't do lobotomies. It's the same reason we wouldn't do an appendectomy for depression.
Right. So yes, it's a physiological answer to a psychological problem motivated by theology. It sounds like to me, in your description, these are people whose lives are bereft of meaning. They're searching, as we all are, for meaning. They see the power inherent in this, creating a new kind of person. And I just wonder, as I hear that, was there any point in medical school, which you were in recently, where they cautioned against hubris? Where they said, you kind of have to stay within the bounds of nature. You didn't create human beings. You kind of have to, maybe there's a higher authority just than you. Was there any caution about starting to think you're God as a doctor?
Zero caution. Never brought it up once.
Yeah. So that now that you are a surgeon, you're not only a doctor, you've got a knife in your hand. How important do you think it is to remember that you're not God as a practicing physician?
And, it's, especially as a surgeon, it's something that, it's a responsibility that you hold so close to you, because especially now that I'm on my own, right? You finish your training and then you're practicing independently. When you take someone to the operating room, they are putting all their trust in you because they're giving themselves to you to treat a problem. And they know that really bad things can happen if things go wrong. So if you take someone to the operating room, you have to make sure that what you're doing is real and that it's going to help them.
Yes.
Because we've all seen cases, every surgeon has seen those cases where things go wrong. And that person's life went from completely normal to a nightmare. And we see these people and we see what their life turns into. And for us, it's that's why it's so unfathomable to think that you could do this to a kid, where you're putting them down this path where they can never come back, where they're going to have permanent physical changes that they can't go back from. And they're going to miss out on so many great parts of life because it was all done when they were 11, 12, 13 years old.
So nicely put. So May 16th, you talk to Chris Rufo, you go public with this. How does the hospital respond? How do your superiors at work respond to this?
Yeah, it's kind of an amazing story. I started reaching out to journalists in January of 2023, and I only got a hold of Rufo mid-May. And when I was first talking to him, we had to go through a verification process to make sure I was a real person. I wasn't BSing him or anything. And he had told me that there was a vote in Texas for a law called SB 14 that was going to ban these hormone-based interventions for children with gender dysphoria. And I had no idea. But it just turns out that we had, been able to get in touch at the best timing possible. So we go through this verification process. We get the story out. And on May 16, it comes out all over the news. And the very next day, the law passes with bipartisan support, partly because of our story. Because so many of these people in Texas and Houston didn't even know this type of thing was happening in their districts. So once this story came out the day before, they knew it was real. So they knew it was a problem, so it was a reason to vote for the law. So within 24 hours of our story coming out, what we had exposed was voted to become illegal, which, for me was a indescribable emotion. It was completely surreal.
So, but I mean, at least some of the effects fell on your employer, the hospital you worked at. They were doing it, now they couldn't do it. So what did they say to you?
Well, by that point, I was still anonymous. So, the story was in the news for a couple days, and no one knew who I was. And about a month later, on the day of my graduation from surgical residency, one of the most important days of my life, just imagine how much you sacrifice when you're training to become a surgeon. All those important events you miss, those family events you'll never get back. So the day you graduate is a really big deal. So my family was in town. I was getting ready for the ceremony. And it was June 23rd, 2023, maybe around 11 a.m., 12. And we were getting ready for the ceremony later that night. And, all of a sudden I get an aggressive knock on the door. I shuffle over. I'm wearing some stupid T-shirt. I open the door, and standing outside are two federal agents. They say they're with Health and Human Services, show me their badges, and that they're investigating a case regarding medical records. And at that moment, I knew exactly what it was about. So, of course, you just kind of freak out in the moment, and you have no idea what to do. So, I invited them in because the doorway seemed a very awkward position. So, we sit down and, exchange some small talk, and, they start setting up recording equipment, very weird. But then my wife comes out. She had been getting ready, and she's a brilliant attorney. And right when she sits down, we look at each other, and, she pulls me aside to the bedroom, and, when it's just us two, we both say to each other, we're like, oh, this is a bad idea. We should not talk to these people. So
yes,
we go back out, and we say, we'd only like to talk to you with an attorney present. So they say, okay. They start packing up their stuff to leave, but before they do, they hand me a piece of paper, and this was a target letter. It was a letter saying that I was I was a potential target in a criminal investigation, and it was signed by a assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Texas with the United States Department of Justice. So a federal criminal investigation. So, a couple minutes after that door opened, the door was closed, and we knew that our lives would be permanently changed. And it was one of those moments where it's a crossroads where you think, what do we do? Do we just try to, plead to something, just make it all go away? Because both of us were, we were starting new lives. Or, do we do the opposite? Do we fight? Because we knew exactly what it was. Like, they knew what day it was. They knew I was graduating. They knew my family was in town. They knew how much that day meant to me. But that was a reason they came, because they wanted to instill fear. They wanted to intimidate. But as they're coming to find out, they had chosen the wrong target, because that day we decided to fight. We would never bend the knee. We would never submit to these tactics of intimidation.
yes,
And trying to go after people who expose something to be true. So, we had, opened a couple bottles of champagne, sat on our patio and, planned our war strategy. We went to the graduation later that night and celebrated with my family, my residents who I had worked with, and all the surgeons who had trained me.
That's an amazing, first of all, thank you for your response. That's the right response. It's a rare response. Most people, you finally graduate, you can go maybe make some of your loans back. The last thing you want is a legal fight. And people are very easily intimidated, as we've seen. But just one fact question. How did they know that you were the person who had leaked this information? You said you hadn't gone public yet.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
So if
I'm sure they've done their investigation.
But you said that was June 23rd, I think you said?
Yeah, so like 5 weeks after.
Yeah,
and it's an important point, like, to have like a department like Health and Human Services, like a typically sclerotic, slow-moving organization,
Yes.
mobilize all these resources, right? Assign these agents, do an investigation, assign a assistant U.S. attorney, right? Determine some legal basis, find out where I live, what day my graduation is, and then send people over to my apartment. And the reason we know that's odd, right? Like, it's unheard of for the HHS to do something like this, is because my wife is an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Texas, and to have something like this happen for something like this couldn't be anything other than a political attempt at intimidation.
Do you suspect that the hospital turned your name over to the feds?
Yeah, good chance.
I mean, this is also Soviet. It's hard to believe. I mean, you said you grew up in Florida. Your wife is from this country too. I mean, it must be so strange just as an American to imagine first that a major prestigious hospital like the one you worked at would be lying about something like this, committing these moral crimes on children, and then you are the one who's punished by the feds. I mean, was there a moment where you're thinking, what country am I in?
You know, I remember reading, I read about political tyranny growing up.
Yes.
And, you know, it's terrifying to think that these things had happened in the past. And, you know, over those years, you would think it's never going to happen in the United States. Never. And it's definitely never going to happen to you. But things really change, you know, when that political tyranny shows up on your doorstep.
Yes.
In the form of 2 HHS agents on the day of your graduation. And yeah, it's a shocking, I mean, it's there's no words. It's surreal. It's unbelievable. But because of that, you know that you have to fight, because if we don't do it now, what future are we delivering our children into? And especially, I mean, it goes to show how crazy this whole situation is, because what we had exposed was voted to become illegal the very next day. Right. The people of Texas, you know, their elected representatives had voted in a bipartisan manner to make this illegal. And the person who told the truth, the federal government, is going after the whistleblower.
Yeah. Well, it tells you everything about how they actually feel about democracy. They're opposed. So where are you now? So, and I should have asked you this. What specifically are you being investigated for? Do you know?
You know, your guess would be just as good as mine at this point. I mean, I really don't know.
Yeah, what is this costing you to defend yourself against a crime no one has explained to you? I mean, is this? Do you have counsel?
Yeah, we do. You know, the day these feds came to my apartment, and you know, I have to give him credit, because you know, we called Christopher Rufo, and this guy he's the real deal. I mean, this guy's, you know, he has a lot of prestige in the world of journalism, but on an individual level, I mean, there's not many people better than him, because you know, when I called him and told him what happened, I mean, he said, cleared his entire schedule, got on the phone, you know, found an attorney who would be able to help, and he had put us in touch with a lawyer by the name of Marcella Burke, and it couldn't have been better timing, because this is a attorney who had she was working at, you know, some prestigious law firm, and she quit because she didn't want to put pronouns in her bio. So she gave up a probably a 7-figure salary, and because she didn't want to put pronouns in her bio. So she led this exodus of conservative attorneys to start her own firm. And this was only a couple months before. And that's when she got the phone call from Chris saying, hey, you know, I have this whistleblower. He needs some help. You know, would you be willing to help? And, you know, Marcella tells me the story that, you know, she's like, oh, I don't know. You know, it sounds kind of risky, but, you know, Chris says something like, well, if not you, then who? And then she knew she had to do it. because this isn't just like some ordinary person. I mean, this is like some strict Catholic, like a rosary in one hand, middle finger in the other, bulldog of an attorney. So, right when we got on the phone with her, we're like, oh my God, this lady's kind of nuts, but in the best way possible.
I love that.
So we knew that, she was the right person for it, because she knew that this was more of a political case than it was a legal case.
Yes.
Because no crime had been committed, but they were targeting whistleblowers in order to make an example of me. Because if they can do it to me, then they can do it to anyone.
Yes.
Right? If you can't have regular doctors and nurses speak out, there's no way to hold hospitals accountable for what they're doing behind closed doors. So, that's to say that we spent a whole bunch of money. I mean, all of our savings, retirement, investments, everything. But I don't say that to like get sympathy, because, it's the best investment we've ever made, because we have the ability to stand up for people who are abusing their authority, to go after people who told the truth. And like, if we don't do it, what kind of world are we delivering our kids into? So
Amen.
If there's any time, now's the time. And, I'll never ask for sympathy or any of that. I mean, it's an opportunity for us. And, we feel privileged to be in this position.
It's just, it's really inspiring to hear you say that. So for people who are motivated by what you just said and want to help, is there some way do you have a legal defense fund, or is there some organ that people can support what you're doing?
Yeah. It's, and just also so people know, when I had first made this decision to even be a whistleblower in the first place anonymously, and then to take on this fight publicly, you think when you make that decision, you're stepping out into this other world where it's just going to be darkness, right? Where you're going to get destroyed, you're going to lose everything.
Yes, that's right.
And it's true, you're going to risk a lot. I mean, you're going to lose a lot, but the one thing you get back, which you never thought would be so meaningful, is you're able to get back your dignity, right? Because you can say true things. You don't have to be scared. And, you realize that there's this entire world of people out there, of people who are willing to sacrifice something meaningful for, a cause worth fighting for. And I mean, in 4 days, we've raised $120,000 in $5 and $25 donations.
Wow.
And, the website is givesendgo.com/Texas, I think, _whistleblower. But, I'm sure if you Google my name, it'll come up.
And your name is Eithan Haim is how it's spelled. So I just got to ask you two last questions. When I read your story back in May, I remember thinking, bless you for doing this. I wish there were thousands more doctors, not just on this topic, but on some others, honestly, who would do the same. But there aren't. There are a few, but not too many. And I've always thought maybe it's the nature of the medical system. Like, it takes so long to become a doctor. It's so expensive. You're on this track. You have to be all in or you can't complete it. And people are loath to get off that track. And I understand that. But what made you different? That's my question. What about you? You're a young guy with a whole life ahead of him, and you derailed your entire life to do this. Why?
Yeah, I think it's a calculation, right? And I think it's a miscalculation on other doctors who decide to not speak out, because, one of the common things we hear is that, well, I have to keep my job, I have to pay these bills, my kids are in college, I have to take care of my family. I think what people don't understand, what they miscalculate, is that if they don't confront these problems now, they're just passing these fights on to their children. So they may think they're taking care of their kids by staying silent and not doing anything about it, but what they're really doing is passing these conflicts on to their kids and future generations. And, my family, I had family in Germany, in Iraq, and Israel, and, when things were really hard for them, they had done the right thing when it was the most difficult thing to do. And I had that legacy growing up. My parents had told me those stories. So who would I be if I didn't do it now? Again,
I think it's really inspiring to hear you say that. And that leads to my last question. How has your marriage fared? I mean, I assume your wife married a doctor, not a whistleblower, but then plans changed. What did it do inside your house? What was the effect?
Yeah, the most amazing thing, we've been closer now than ever. Yeah. You feel so privileged to have, things like this have brought us together in a way that you can't even imagine, because I've seen how strong she is in times where it's really, really challenging, and you think you love someone, but then you go through something like this, and then you can't even describe how much you care for her. And so, yeah, it's something I can't even describe. I feel so lucky every day. I know it's been hard. It's definitely been hard.
Yes.
But
well, I hope people watching this, particularly people in positions of authority, see that as hard as it is to do the right thing and to tell the truth in public and to take the abuse that you know is coming, it's worth it, because you keep your self-respect and the respect of your wife.
Absolutely.
Which is not a small thing. Dr. Haim, thank you. That was an amazing conversation, and Godspeed going forward.
Thank you.
Free speech is bigger than any one person or any one organization. Societies are defined by what they will not permit. What we're watching is the total inversion of virtue.